are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. And you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today we are diving into the dynasty value of a bunch of players on the Denver Nuggets. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. I'm not going to be talking about Big Chungus Nikola Jokic. I'm not going to be talking about Gary Harris.
Nice, Gary!
I'm not even going to be talking about the headmaster, Jamal Murray. Those are guys, I'm looking more of the players who haven't really established or in their first few seasons in the NBA. These guys like Harris and Jokic and Murray have, and Jeremy Grant even, have established themselves, and we sort of have an idea what their role and value is, even if there is going to be some fluctuation. I'm talking about the other guys, the younger players, first, second, third year type of guys. And the first one I want to talk about is Monte Morris, who really has stepped it up this season. He's playing 22 minutes a night for the Denver Nuggets as not only a backup point guard, but he plays alongside Jamal Murray in quite a bit of time. Now, interestingly, his PIPM is actually one of the worst on the teams, negative 1.12. Some of that is because of the absolute strength of this starting lineup, and the on-off stuff reflects that similarly. He's a negative 2 in on-off. Interestingly, Torrey Craig and Jeremy Grant are both negative 9 for Craig, negative 8.8 for Grant. They're really, really poor on that bench unit. Morris is a minus 2 in terms of on-off, which is not great, but it's not ideal. But when you've got those starters putting up plus 7s, plus 8s, that's where that big difference is. But in terms of what Morris can do, can he be a starting point guard in the NBA? I don't think you'd be overly thrilled if he was your starting point guard, but can he do it? Sure. Now, he is almost 25. He's averaging 8 points with 3.5 assists in his 21 minutes. The shooting has been pretty strong, 38% from 3, 82% from the line. But a really poor rebounder. Steals aren't fantastic. A low volume 3-point shooter as well. Yeah, what he's doing is pretty strong, but is it something that we look at where, hey, there's this huge upside in Morris? Will anyone ever want to bring him on to be a starting point guard in the NBA? And I think there are doubts about that. Could he move into a role like a Malcolm Brogdon at some point and become that a higher usage player like he was going from the Bucks to the Pacers? Maybe. But Brogdon was also a starter before that and a really good player before that. And I think Morris is still pretty good. I don't think he's got high-end 20-point per game upside, nowhere near that level. But 16 and 7, 16 and 8, obviously a really low turnover player. But then low rebounds, low threes, relatively low steals, low free throw rate. All those things are a concern when we talk about Morris and talk about his future fantasy value. So I always like him as an assist stream, and if he ever finds himself in a starting role playing 30 minutes a night, then yeah, those assists can come from Morris. But in terms of just looking at his long-term potential, I'm not really sure it's there. He has started 8 games this year, 33 minutes in those games, 11 and 4 he averaged. Like, they're not great numbers. 1 3, 1 steal. Not great numbers. And again, he is already 25. So while we do like him, and I think he's a great backup point guard, scaling that up to become a better player, to become a 27-minute-a-night guy, even if that's a bench or a starter guy like a Lou Williams off the bench or a 30-minute-a-night starter, I'm not sure he becomes this player that we look at and go, well, he's going to get that role and then he's going to be really good for fantasy when he gets there. I'm not really sure that's what we look at when we think about Monte Morris. Let's talk about Michael Porter Jr., of course, a rookie this season, drafted the year before because he missed all of that first season with those back injuries. He's played 48 games, but only 14 minutes per contest. He is the 263rd ranked fantasy player this season, Porter, averaging 7.5 points with 4 rebounds. Low steal and block numbers, assists ridiculously low. Efficiency's been pretty good, 59% true shooting. That's a real step forward for Porter, and I think that he has got, obviously, a larger upside than someone like Monte Morris. Now, in terms of the games he started, he only started 1 game this season. He averaged 19 and 6 in that one, but it is really hard to get a full read on him, especially with the way Michael Malone uses him. Now, this offseason is going to be a real defining one for what happens with Porter. Will they start him next season as a starting 3? Will Paul Millsap and Jeremy Grant, will either of them be back? Will both of them be back? I think Porter's best spot moving forward is going to be at the 4. So if those 2 guys return, that further delays what Porter can do. But in terms of what he's been able to do this season, I think it's been impressive enough to see him out there scoring at that level. Defensively, he has had some troubles. There's no doubt about that, and Malone hates that about him. Therefore, we don't get the minutes that, even when Malone comes out there and says, oh, he's going to play 20 minutes a night, then plays him 5 minutes a night, that's obviously a concern with his long-term value. Can Porter bring anything outside of high volume scoring with some good efficiency? I'm not certain. I'm not banking on that sort of stuff. I think he can be a good rebounder. So maybe he can be a 4 category producer with some threes. And that's still a pretty good fantasy player. I think he's going to have some top 50 seasons as we move forward. I don't think he's ever going to push into the top 20 or anything along those lines. And the lack of defensive ability, the way that the coach is holding him back. But that's not something, again, that's going to last forever. I don't think Malone's a 10-year coach there. And if he is, I don't think Porter's going to be a 10-year player for the Nuggets. He might move on somewhere else and have that extra opportunity to thrive. I think Porter can work well with Nikola Jokic as he moves forward, and that's obviously a great sign for him and his value, but we need to get a little bit more of an ability for him to contribute in other areas outside of just really high volume scoring. But 22 usage that he's got, that can improve. He can be a 25-26 guy. I think at some point the rebounding has been pretty strong. It's just the other numbers that do lack a little bit for Michael Porter Jr. As we're all, of course, locked up in our houses, or we should be in our houses, quarantining due to this coronavirus pandemic, you need people to be able to bring things to you. And the guys at Postmates, that's exactly what they do. If you're looking to order food in and you don't want to leave the house responsibly, so order through Postmates. They can bring you not only food, but they can bring you other things as well. Convenience stores, clothing stores, you name it. Postmates can bring it to you. No more trips to the store, no more late night fast food runs. You don't even have to worry about where you're grabbing your lunch. You can rely on Postmates. Just download Postmates on iOS or Android. Find your favorites and get anything you want delivered within the hour. And for a limited time, Postmates is giving our listeners $100 of free delivery credit for your first 7 days. To start your free deliveries, download the app and use the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's code LOCKEDONNBA for $100 of free delivery credit with no minimum purchase for your first 7 days when you download the Postmates app. Anything you need, anytime you need it, Postmate it. Let's move on to the next player here for the Nuggets, and that is Keita Bates-Diop, who came across from the Minnesota Timberwolves in that Malik Beasley deal during the trade deadline. Now, Bates-Diop had a pretty strong run at times for Minnesota. He hasn't really had an opportunity at all for the Denver Nuggets, but he is a player who did have some decent enough defensive numbers in college. That hasn't really translated to the NBA. The shooting has been a little bit off, and again, when you're playing a similar position to someone like Porter, to Barton, to Millsap, to Grant, he is a long way down the pecking order here in Denver. And I don't think he did enough in those first couple of seasons in Minnesota to think that he's going to have a huge role if he moves someone else. He's very much buried in the Juancho Hernan-Gomez type of role in Denver. And Juancho played well when he went to Minnesota, but he didn't get those opportunities in Denver. And I wouldn't be surprised to see Bates-Diop not on this team by the time we head to the 2020-21 season, whenever that may begin. So Keita had some solid enough moments in Minnesota when he was forced into a role, but we just haven't seen really anything from him for the Nuggets since coming across. I think he's only played 19 minutes so far in his Denver career, which is really not enough to get a full read on. Over the course of this season, the 39 games he's played, he's averaged almost 7 points with 3 rebounds and half a steal and half a block, 43 and 71%, which are okay numbers, but they're nothing really spectacular. He is already 24 years of age as well, in now his second year in the NBA, and I don't really see Bates-Diop being a full-time starter really at any point in his NBA career. So could he push? He's outside the top 300 at the moment. Could he push into the top 200? Maybe, if he was in a 25-minute-a-night role. I just don't really see teams falling all over themselves to give him that level of a role. The Nuggets aren't really blessed with a huge amount of young talent. We've got guys on this team, as I said, Jokic, Murray, Barton, Millsap, Harris, Grant, Plumlee, Craig. These are all guys who are relatively established or older players. And the 3 guys that I'm going to talk about to round this out are players that we barely have seen at the NBA level, but they do have some G League numbers and some upside that it's worth talking about. Let's talk about PJ Dozier now, who has had 3 years in the G League playing across multiple teams. This season, he's been playing with the Chicago Bulls affiliate, as a number of the Nuggets G League players do, because the Nuggets don't have a G League. Dozier's averaging 21 points per game with 8 rebounds and over 7 assists, almost 7.5 assists, 1.6 steals. He's shooting just 33% from three, but those other numbers are really impressive. He's also been able to improve his free throws, which were sub 70% prior to this season, up to 74. He has been a real star in the G League so far this season. Those numbers are impressive. Defensively, he's been pretty good as well. And I think there is at least some interest in what Dozier's been doing. Now, the problem is he's a little bit older. He's 24 at the moment, I believe. Almost 24, not quite there yet. So he's not super old, but he's also not super young. But he's got a good size as a 2 guard, a 6'6" guard. Those assist numbers, super impressive. He averaged almost 7 assists last season as well for Iowa as a 6'6" shooting guard. So there is some impressive numbers there. In terms of Denver and Gary Harris obviously playing at the 2, and if they integrate Porter more at the 3, that means Barton plays more at the 2. Finding that role for him to push up is probably tough to do. But I think what we've seen from Dozier in the G League for these last 2 seasons, he's been really, really impressive and doing it without great shooting. Now, there is a concern there that because he's not shooting well and if the ball is out of his hands, which it will be in the NBA, what the hell else is he doing? But the rebounding, the assists, very reminiscent of a former Denver player, Fat Lever, as a guard, being able to get big rebound and big assist numbers and solid steal numbers and solid block numbers. He does have some very interesting fantasy potential if he's ever able to turn that on and become a solid enough NBA player. There is upside there in him, no doubt about that. I think there's more upside than someone like Bates Diop to get to that level, but we haven't seen it really yet in the NBA. But some definitely encouraging signs from PJ Dozier during his time in the G League so far this season. The next guy we talk about is a rookie who was drafted a couple of years ago, but just came over this season, 6'8" forward Vlatko Cancar. From Slovenia. He has only played 10 G League games this season. 14 points for the Erie Bayhawks, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 39% from 3 on over 6 attempts. That's the number that's really standing out, as well as 3 assists as a small forward shooting guard type of player. Pretty interesting. Now, defensive stuff hasn't been super strong from him. 0.9 steals, 0.3 blocks in those 29 minutes, but that shooting, the shooting volume, the scoring is still pretty low usage player, but nice rebounding with some okay type defensive things. I think that's relatively interesting from Cancar, who was a guy who I was marginally interested in when he was drafted coming out of Europe, but in terms of does he ever push into a starter's role, unless he finds himself in a situation like fellow European wing Chetty Osman on the Cavs, then I don't see Cancar ever really pushing into that sort of a role. Hasn't done anything so far at the NBA level in his 14 games, 3 minutes a night, 1 point per game, but at least some intriguing things there. Volume 3-point shooting in the G League, an ability to pass in the G League as well, which is an intriguing thing for a wing, but often that's not going to be able to translate because he's just not going to necessarily have the ball in his hands as much as what we would hope. And even in the G League, really, really low usage player. That's a level of concern as to what the hell then does he do when he starts playing up with the big boys. Now, his last season in Europe, playing in the Spanish league, he played 23 minutes a night and still just 10 points per game and shot only 33% from 3. So this high volume 3-point shooting and really, really strong percentages, can that continue? He also averaged only 1 assist per game in Europe. So that's an additional thing that he's developed. Is that real as well? So we have to have some question marks about what Vlatko Cancar has done so far, but I think he's been impressive enough to at least get a shot if they do clear out guys like Bates Diop and Grant or Millsap, one of those guys moves and they change things around, and he can fit in as an 11th or 12th man on a roster and start to push a little bit further. I think we're still a few years away from that. He's just turned 23 as well, so again, not the youngest sort of player, but another 2-3 year rotation player window for Cancar is not outrageous to me, but I'm just not sure the upside's all that high. Let's talk high upside now, and let's talk Bol. Of course, Bol has not played in the NBA so far this season. It's not that he's been injured, but he has been injured. He's dealing with a foot injury because he's played 8 games in the G League, but not at all in the NBA. 8 games for the Windy City Bulls, 12 points in 19 minutes, 2 blocks per game, half a 3 per game. Now, the big intrigue with Bol coming out of Oregon was unbelievable 3-point shooting, good volume, good shot blocking, pretty decent scoring. He's averaging 12 and 5.5, which is okay. And on a per 36 basis, that's 22 and 10 with 4 blocks. Good numbers. But the 3-point volume hasn't been there. Under 1 3 per 36, 2.6 attempts per 36. He's shooting 36%, which is really good. 63% from 2-point range, really good. Hasn't missed a free throw at all in his 154 minutes. He's only 6 from 6, but he hasn't missed a free throw there. So there's enough there to get interested with. Now, the problem with Bol is his body. Can he stay healthy? Can he stay strong enough on the court to get enough minutes to block shots? His center of gravity is so high. Concerns about off-court stuff, about desire to improve and to work hard at the game. There's so many of those question marks still out there about him, but the upside is clear. A really good shooting big man who hits his free throws, who blocks his shots, who can rebound at a strong rate. If all those things come together, then there's value there. Of course, he's not overtaking Nikola Jokic at any point, but we're talking about a guy that maybe another team sees something in, or in a 20-minute-a-night role, 22-minute-a-night role, couple of minutes crossover with Jokic when Plumlee is gone and he blocks 2 shots and has 12 points and hits 1.5 threes in that time, which I think what his role would be in the NBA, then there's value in that. So there is still some upside in what Bol can do. We obviously haven't seen it in the NBA, and there are definitely concerns about whether he gets it. And I think the most likely outcome for him is he never becomes a 20-minute-a-night player in the NBA. But so far, the numbers from Oregon have marginally translated over to the G League at a pretty similar rate, apart from the 3-point volume. But the blocking, the efficiency, the scoring, the rebounding, all that stuff is at a pretty good level in those 8 G League games. But of course, that is a really, really low bar. It's a really, really low volume of production from Bol, but it gives us interest. Of course, we're prioritizing him over Chanchar, over Dozier, over Bates Diop, not over Porter. Morris is the interesting one, and Morris's floor is significantly higher. The production's already there. Can he step it up? Probably more likely than Bol, but I still think that we should have some level of upside flyerness there with Bol, and hopefully we can get things figured out. But I don't think he's ever going to be a starting center, ever going to be a 25-minute-a-night plus player. But again, he can still be valuable because if he gets 17 minutes, if he gets 18 minutes, he can block 2 shots, he can hit a 3, he can have 10 points, he can be really efficient from the field and from the line as well. As I said, the Nuggets didn't have a huge amount of prospects for me to go through, so that's going to wrap it up for me today. And make sure you are subscribed to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on YouTube. Go ahead and give me a thumbs up down below. Hit the little bell so you never miss an episode. Interact, leave a comment. Follow me on Twitter at redrock_bball. And after you finish listening to this episode, go and check out today's episode of Hollinger and Duncan right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.